for September 16th, 2017. There it is. It's that music. It's Saturday morning. It's time for Suddenly I've Turned Into Radio Guy. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. Joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from the averageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. You know, it's a different experience. Like, so the music's not making its way to me, and it's interesting to hear someone talk over the music and not have the music there. Yeah, it does. I think in podcasting, when we play that and we're listening to it, it's interesting how that probably influences your intro a little bit. I bet you would do your intro different. I don't do my intro with music. I add that later. Right. We always do it live. I wonder if that music has an influence on the way we do our intro if we're listening to it as we're recording it. So it's just an interesting thought. Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah, you should be able to hear this now, hopefully.
Whoa! There we go.
There we go. I forgot to turn up the auxiliary.
Yeah, no sweat. No sweat. It was one of those weird moments where you're like, wow, this is really interesting hearing him do this. Without, because typically I'm dancing in the background, having a good time, and it wasn't there. It was quiet.
It's very quiet, very weird. Well, let's just jump right into a question here. Now, if you want to join on in, you can simply go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, and you will be jumping right into the Google Hangout. And let's see here. I just had, that's interesting. Where is all? Don't Google Docs save the minute you leave them? Okay,
they're supposed to. They're supposed to. Yeah.
Okay, so it says here's the fun thing. I forgot to copy people's names. I copied their questions. I was like, oops. It says I have a dilemma. For my podcast, I've brought on a co-host, but have no idea how to get both of us to sync up at the same time for two separate locations. I heard about Zencastr, but was always told it was somewhat of a pain. I read about Google Hangouts that can cause distortion. Anything can cause distortion if you pump enough volume into it.
Maybe compression is what he meant. That's probably what he meant.
Yeah. Any ideas? And Jim, our answer here has been what?
For us, it's what works best for you. That's what I always say.
Try them all.
Well, I know in these podcasters group, we try to save people time by giving them, but there are so many different solutions and everything might vary. And I'd love to see some folks kind of try some stuff first before they come in, because I'm watching this happen all the time. Somebody asks a question like that, and then 15 different solutions get listed. That's not helpful. Like, okay, so now we have a list of everything. So now we know what it is. You're going to have to go out and decide anyway. So I guess that meets the criteria there, or that helps. But I think you still, even though you get these recommendations, it varies for what you do and what your comfort level is and how techie you are or not. So I think it's a good exercise to give them all a try yourself. Like, test those things out. Get a list, and then know. And yeah, I know it takes time, but you'll never know what's available out there unless you give it a try. So I'm a big fan of everybody trying. You should try those different solutions and see how they work for you.
Yeah, that was going to be, that's literally what we've done in this show. Now, we do it partly just because people want to know, what about, what's the thing we're doing International Podcast Day on? I just had Fire Talk.
Fire Talk, yeah.
Fire Talk and BeLive.tv and Blog Talk Radio. We've tried them all.
Facebook Live.
Hangouts,
get out there and try. I think even for early podcasters, this is a great way for you to find your voice in trying all these different things. They don't have to be podcasts. Just do stuff. Go out and talk about things. Create these things and use them. Try socializing them to see where they're going to go. I think you're selling yourself and you're cutting. You're shortcutting it or short hopping it, to use a baseball term. If you don't try these things in your own way, because you may find something that works really well for you that if you had just taken, okay, I'm just going to use Hangouts. Well, okay, they work. That's great. But what else could you do?
Right. Especially because Zencastr, I believe, has a free program where you can record. I think it only records in an MP3 format. But in terms of is it easy? Does it work? You can definitely kick the tires on that. Same thing. Google Hangouts just changed. they just changed the back end of YouTube. In fact, I saw today where there's a place you can go in and say, give me back my old YouTube, because now you have to go into the something creator studio to, so by the time you get it down, you have to figure out there's 27 other clicks you have to go through. But
yeah. It's a good exercise to roll through some of them. At the same time, it's also good to listen to the advice of the community. So I don't want to, we start these groups to have this community advice. So I don't want to shortcut that. But all right, looks like Nancy jumped in here. Hey, Nancy.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I've been binging on all of your podcasts, group, individual, etc. And I just wanted to say that what I realize is that even though I'm approaching my 400th episode,
nice,
you guys helped me realize how much I don't know and what a disadvantage I've been at to not really understanding so much of the tech. So it's as much as, sometimes you think I don't need podcast 101. You guys make me realize I really need it, even now as I get ready to launch something different. So thank you.
What's your show?
My show's Wine at 9. Which is wine with an H. And of course it has, I do celebrity interviews. So it has nothing to do with wine anymore, but I've been so busy. You like that, right? You want the title?
No, I love the wine. That's when you said Wine at 9, I was like, I'm into that podcast. Let's do it.
Yeah, well, so I'm getting ready to do things differently. And you guys have helped me see that. And I just want to say thanks.
Oh. Well, you're welcome. Yeah, I've been helping Nancy on the Spreaker, on the Nancy had can I talk about your problem?
Yeah.
Nancy had the problem of somebody came along and said, now I'm going to give you my side of the story. This is what I know. But somebody's like, hey, I can help you with your podcast. And they took her feed and moved her to a different host, right?
Oh no, the person who started it, I don't think really knew much about podcasting and set it all up with that's how it was set up from the beginning, as the way I understand it. And then we later moved over to Libsyn, but still the old problem was in place, as I understand. But see, I don't know the tech, so you would know better than I what's gone on.
So she's in the process now of having somebody else put in a redirect, like they control the Spreaker account that she's on, right? Correct? Do you have any access to that Spreaker
Am I on
account?
Spreaker? I don't even know. This shows you can have a podcast and you really don't know the tech, right?
Yeah. The iTunes right now is looking at a feed in Spreaker. Well, she's on Libsyn, and so it sounds like the person who set her up has the login name and password. So that's why I told Nancy, I said, be very nice to these people, because if they put in this 301 redirect.
So did they create it as a show on their own account? So, and then because each one of the shows on Spreaker can have its own RSS feed. So
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, when it was set up, the person who knew we were doing the podcast set up the WordPress site and set everything up via WordPress and gave us everything. I mean, we hired the person to do that. And so I have all of that information, but I know we didn't use Libsyn initially. And so then we switched over to Libsyn, but I've never updated the WordPress site for fear, because early on years ago, Dave Jackson said to me, be very careful because you could lose everything. So I've kind of just been tiptoeing and so busy doing the podcast, as you know, just creating your content, that it's like you put it on the back page, So I'm really trying to get up to speed to save it and to know what I need to know so this would never happen again. But with working with Dave, I'm sure every time I finish an email to Dave, I'm like, he's probably like, this is what it would be like working with my mother.
No. No. People always say that all the time. They email Libsyn and be like, I hate to bug you again. I'm like, trust me, if nobody emails me, like on occasion, it doesn't happen a lot, but there will be on occasion, you'll have a day where like apparently nobody has any questions and you'll log in and there's like, 7 tickets and there's, a whole team of people and those 7 tickets go and they're going like, all right, I guess let's see what's on Netflix today.
And the thing that you remind me of is that in terms of doing this, I get so scared, just like a parent, that you're going to lose all your data, all your banking information or whatever. And I have to kind of step back and realize, because I don't have access to the knowledge base that you guys have, I get more fearful, whereas I realize you can step in and usually correct things or show me how to make corrections for myself. But in general, I get panicked that I'm going to lose everything forever.
I would rather have that attitude than the person that doesn't ask. We had somebody.
Hey Dave, before you go on, when you snapped, something happened to your audio. We got a little Cylons going on in there. Can you mute and unmute and see or do something to see if we can? Let's see. Try again.
All right.
No, that's weird.
Let's try this.
It's the live channel, so I would hate to. It's not like we can have you hang up and call back.
Should I try changing to a different microphone and then changing back?
Yeah. Let's give that a try. Here, Nancy, we're going to troubleshoot. Just hang tight.
No, it's cool.
That's right. So I'm going to change to my camera.
Yeah.
Audio.
Okay, there we go. And now we're on your camera. Now switch.
Camera. Okay. And now I'm going to switch back to. Oh, that's interesting. No, there it is.
I thought it disappeared.
There we go.
And now we're back.
It was your snap. When you snapped, the audio changed. I've never heard anything like that happen before. Keep going, Dave. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I'm glad you said that because nobody wants to listen.
No,
to
it was pretty brutal. Yeah,
45 minutes.
Yeah.
We had somebody that just went into Libsyn, and with Libsyn, you can redirect your feed without even contacting support. That's the good news. But if you don't know what you're doing when you do that, and she redirected her feed to Anchor. And then now iTunes is looking at Anchor, and she uploaded her file to Libsyn, and it didn't show up in iTunes because iTunes wasn't looking at Libsyn anymore. And so she had no idea that she'd really, for more or less left Libsyn. And she's like, oh, I don't want to do that. So then we had to contact Anchor, which was interesting because the people at Anchor said, oh, no, just remove your redirect and it'll go back. And we're like, no. And that's when I went, ooh, there are people over there that may not know what they're talking about at Anchor.
And I know about that because I heard you guys talking about that in one of your episodes. Mm-hmm. So it's like the kind of thing that you don't think you need to know, but when you listen to the show, you figure it out. So thank you for getting me even just a little bit more up to speed.
Well, awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. We deeply appreciate it. Anything else we can help you with?
No, probably everything. I probably just need to come live with you guys for a couple months and get up to speed. But I'm sure I'll be back bugging you.
All right. We're here every Saturday.
Saturday. We're here for you. Just let us know.
Oh, I do have a question for you.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's why we're here.
Okay. How do you know if when it comes time to do a new podcast title? I'm going back and forth. And, I've gotten to the point where you're pretty well known for something, for instance, and my son, who is quite knowledgeable about certain things, is like, you can't use Dr. Nancy Burke because that sounds like it's a psychology show or it's a pure whatever. It's a medical show, and yet that's kind of your brand, and people know you in that space. Would you do you think it, and part of me too is, after having a podcast that's copyrighted and that people still do ones that are similar and all of that, I feel like I just don't want to go into a title that is, if I'm doing something on knitting, I don't want to put the word knitting in it, even though I know that brings people there. I'm just sick of changing and whatever. Do you think it's a bad idea to ever use your name in a podcast? That was a long one. I'm sorry.
What I would do is like the Dr. Nancy show dash talking blah, 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 because you got to have your keywords in there.
Right.
So
sure.
Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, well, titles are the most important. I think when we think about SEO, that you need to think about that the longest and the hardest. And like Dave said, with keywords, that's where you really need to kind of think through, what are people going to be searching for when they go to find this? And so using your own name, if it's unique enough that it's an advantage, yes. If it's John Smith, I'm not sure that's going to get you any right. Or if there's somebody else famous in that space, we had a guy who worked for us at Gallup. His name is Paul Allen, and there's a very famous Microsoft founder named Paul Allen. And so using those names together, or if we tried to use that name, hey, we're doing this thing with Paul Allen, it would have been confusing because there's already somebody out there who is that, and they might get confused about the name. But if you're using your name and you feel like it's fairly unique in that space, I'd take advantage of it. If you think you can brand around your own name, yeah, I would.
Well, and it's not a fame factor. It's just that, I've written for so long now and for such high profile publications that you kind of get a following, and you kind of know that in that space. And then in the space of the celebrity space, if you're known and you're an entity that people trust, I hate to throw that away as well, but anyway, it's
I would.
Interesting. And then, now with so many podcasts, so many more podcasts than there used to be way back when, it's like very difficult. You come up with a great idea, you Google it, done.
But that shouldn't stop you. Just because somebody else is doing it doesn't mean it can't be done better, right? I mean, Apple has made a living in this space of creating the second or third generation of an idea. They just did it the best. And so just because someone's got a podcast doesn't mean you can't do it with your own individual unique spin on it. That makes it better.
The other thing to keep in mind is sometimes we'll see that there's 4 other shows with the same exact title. I go back and see when their last episode was, because if there's 4 there, I'm going to guess at least 2 haven't had an episode since 2014.
Right.
They did 6 episodes and quit. So,
Dave, you say that you've made a living on this, by the way, in School of Podcasting, is that in this idea of cooperation as well. Just if you can get into the community and then cooperate or co-opetition, I think is what we've called that, with those podcasters in that space and create a community. The one who survives the longest is the one who wins, because as people drop off those because people pod fade, it just happens.
Right.
If you've been working with them, guess what? They'll come to you, right? So if Daniel all of a sudden or he quit, you can't start quitting, but if he quit doing Audacity to podcast, when he stops, people would be like, oh, I need something to listen to. Chances are they're probably going to think of Dave Jackson, because those two do a lot of things together, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's some advantage to being nice in your space and working with other podcasters and being on their show and getting known with them. And I think that's a huge advantage in the space. So don't underestimate that as well.
Cool.
I know, just case in point, Cliff Ravenscraft has announced that his next Podcasting A to Z course will more than likely, he's kind of left the door cracked this much, be his last podcast course that he's going to do. He wants to get more into life coaching and business coaching. And so hopefully all those people go, oh, I can't learn from Cliff, I'll go learn from Dave.
He's changing, right? He's morphing a little bit in there. Yeah.
So
does that help, Nancy?
Yeah, no, you guys are great.
Yeah.
And as International Podcast Day comes up,
yep.
Can I ask you one question?
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys had advice for someone who's never listened to a podcast before. What would it be? Because I have to say, as much as I've been podcasting, it was like a light switch went off recently when I had it, when I had a very long drive, and now I'm more podcast obsessed than ever because I've found an easy way for me to use it. Do you have like one tip that you'd give your grandmother or your mom or your dad that, to get them using a podcast? Because I feel like that's my new mission,
Yeah. Well, if they're English speaking in America, chances are they own an iPhone. That's just the way it works, right? And it's super easy to get them on that podcast app. And as I've said to people, look, there's a big purple icon that says podcasts. And if you just go in there and click the little search button, search on any topic you're interested in and download one and try it. The other thing we say on the Gallup podcasts when I do those is I tell them it's a time to recapture that time you're in a train, on a plane, or in a car. And I kind of plant that idea that really the power of podcasting is to be able to take that time you normally waste or be doing something else, right? When you're on a plane, you got nothing to do. Listen to a podcast, right? When you're traveling into work, I get 40 minutes a day, right, to listen to podcasts. When I say that to people, the light comes on. They're like, oh, yeah, no, I can do that in my car. I just got a new car. It's got Bluetooth, right, or whatever. So those are the ways I go about it. Dave?
Yeah, I do the same thing. I will grab their phone and I go, what are your hobbies? And if they go, I don't know, I'm out. And if they go, I don't have any hobbies. If they stop, I'm like, okay, what's your favorite TV show? And then I'll I like to listen to Once Upon a Time. Okay, then I'll pull up Daniel's show or whatever, and just give them something. Just go look, and then I go, oh, by the way, these are all free. And that's usually when they go, really? And I'm like,
Right,
yeah.
right.
And if you don't like it, you just swipe right and go delete. And I'm like, really? It's always fun. It's been a while. When I just did a talk at Kent State University, and that's how I start off kind of the session. I kind of explain what a podcast is, and then I'm like, anybody that on an Android, I have them download Stitcher. Anybody on an iPhone, I have them just look at the podcast app. And then I just go in and I go, and here's the good news. If the one you just downloaded you don't like, just delete it. And there's only another, 4 million to choose from. So,
But can you imagine if every podcaster did that? Like, I think that everybody, the podcasts, they don't think like that often. They're just so into their own head and hearing their own voice. If we all actively did what you guys are saying you do. So anyway, that's my new mission.
I'm
If we all
tempted on next week sometime for international. I'm tempted to go to the mall with
That's cool.
a portable recorder and just walk up to random people and go, do you listen to podcasts? And just see what happens. And then spend a lovely 2 hours editing that down to something we can listen to. So,
Well, thank you guys so much.
You bet, Nancy.
welcome.
Thanks for jumping in here. Great to meet you.
Thank you. You too.
You bet. Have a
Thank
great
you,
Saturday.
Dave, for holding my hand.
oh, anytime.
Bye.
Bye,
I'll
Nancy.
see you. But yeah, Jim, are we? Well, I guess we don't know if we're doing anything for International Podcast Day.
Yeah,
Well,
I need to work on that.
If you want, Nancy, if you're done, you can just click on the little red phone thingy at the top.
See, could you tell I didn't know what I was doing?
Well, I was just like, I just turned on, I'm like, she's still
Thank
here,
you,
which is
Dave.
fine.
Your mother is leaving. Bye.
Oh, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're working on the International Podcast Day. Great opportunity, though. You just gave me this interesting idea of, you say you go to the mall and you help people. There may be some opportunities. I don't do this enough when I go. Like I do these. I just got done doing a podcasting conference. No, that's a lie. It was a tech conference about 2 weeks ago, and I did like 13 interviews during the tech conference. Right, keynotes, session leaders. I do this all the time. By the way, that is gold. Like if you can partner with a conference in your space and interview those session leaders, that is, I have 7.5, 8 hours of content that's just sitting there waiting to work its way into my channel, and it's great content. So if you're not stealing my idea on that, you should be out there getting that done. It's a great way to get it done. But I should put at the booth, like, ask me how to subscribe to my podcast. If that should be a shirt of some kind. Now you can't, I don't know if you can just do it on the street. But when you're in those circumstances where you're in your niche or you're working somewhere like a conference or a festival or whatever, and you've got an opportunity to have a table, or you could to do a shirt where you can prompt people to say, hey, ask me how to subscribe to my podcast. That gets the conversation going. And you can say, actually, subscribing to because people might say, hey, like I've heard about this podcasting stuff, but I don't know how to do it. Well, let me show you like what you do, right? And then you grab the phone and you do the things. So I don't know. I think I could probably do more in just prompting people to ask about how do I subscribe? Because I think there's people who don't know how, but they're afraid to ask because it makes them feel stupid. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if, you're watching, I don't know, Jimmy Fallon, and he talks about podcasting, and then you watching Orange is the New Black, and they talk about podcasting, and you're kind of like, you like you said, you don't want to go, well, I don't even know what a podcast is. Because then people are like, what do you mean?
Well, and 4 years ago, it was super nerdy. And so people would be like, well, I don't know, the nerds are doing that, right? And then all of a sudden Serial came on, right? And we've got all these podcastings. By the way, I'm watching this this new thing happen with news organizations. So the San Jose Mercury News, where I grew up, the local newspaper, produced their own can you guess what it was? Mystery and, news, hanging
True
30
crime?
years ago. True crime. I'm hanging 30 years ago. Who did it? Why are we still talking about it? Kind of thing. And so I'm noticing this new trend as newspapers. By the way, I mean, they have a lot of great content. I mean, think about it. Think about the history, all the historical stuff they have in their archives. But anyways, I don't know where I was going with that, but I took myself off the rails.
That's all right. Just the fact that more and more people are getting into it.
Right. There you go. And so today, I think it's super acceptable. Thank you for putting me back on the tracks. I think today it's super acceptable to people don't feel that it's not that weird nerd thing anymore. It's kind of mainstream media. So I think it's been more than ever, if we can prompt people to help ask us that question, how do I subscribe? I think we got a shot at it.
Yeah. It's there are two things that I've always wanted to do. One would be that go to a mall and just ask people about podcasting. The other thing it's one of those podcasts, if I had, 80 hours in a day, I would do. I would love to go around to everybody holding up a cardboard sign that says, we'll work for food or whatever, and go, what's your story? Just to find out. Because I bet there's a lot of myths about, because there are those people that look at, quote, homeless people, which doesn't mean they're homeless, but they're standing there. And, I think a lot of people, freeloader, go get a job. Yeah. But I'm like, there's probably more to that story than you think. I always thought that would be an interesting, I'll give you $20 for your story kind of thing.
Yeah, or maybe pay that guy to hold up a sign that says, "I'll help you subscribe to a podcast," right? As they come by.
Okay, that's it. Instead of holding up a cardboard, I'll pay you $100 to hold up my domain name at this corner.
Yeah, how much do you think you make in a day? I'm going to pay you twice that to hold up my podcast.
A sign, yeah. Because there's a they just started right by my house, like a block from my house. We call it six corners because in Ohio, we love to do this. We take all these different roads and combine them into one giant intersection so that you sit there literally for 7 minutes waiting for the light to change. And so people have figured this out. So they're standing there with their signs.
In Indiana, they're changing all of those to roundabouts. So instead of having lights, it's a big, gigantic roundabout.
The roundabout.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago with intros. This person asked the plan for the Dark Fantasy Podcast. Talk about a genre that is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Type in the word fantasy football in iTunes. Well, let's take a tangent before I even answer this question. I had somebody ask me, they go, look, I'm in iTunes, but I can't find it. And his show was FU fantasy football.
Mm-hmm.
And I typed in, and he goes, when you type in fantasy football, I'm not there. And I counted because it said, here's the results. And then you have a see all button. And when you click on see all, there were 100 fantasy football shows, but none of them were his. So there's an example of there's a ton of fantasy football. Now, if I typed in FU fantasy football, he came right up. But if you just typed in fantasy football, and that's where I always tell people, you got to have a button on your website, because if you just say find me in iTunes, then they've got to type in the exact right thing. Otherwise, because there's whatever it is, 4 million now podcasts in iTunes, and there's 1,000 new a week and things like that. So
it's a good way. It's a good way to use your domain, by the way. I have the averageguy.tv for my network, but Home Gadget Geeks, the name of my tech podcast, homegadgetgeeks.com, goes to just a very simple page that has 2 buttons. Subscribe on Android, subscribe on iTunes.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Big buttons. You can't even fat finger it. They're just right there.
So he says, I'm producing, but the plan for the Dark Fantasy Podcast I'm producing is to have music only during the intro and the outro. Does 30 seconds at the beginning feel like it would be too long and we should cut it down to 15? To my answer, that's actually one of my pet peeves. If somebody goes, here's the intro to the show, and all of a sudden it's just, he said, looking for any kind of music that he can't find. I have applause. Where's my happy music? There we go. So if we just had this, with no voiceover for 30 seconds, that would drive me nuts. I'd be waiting for somebody to come in and go, welcome to the Dark Fantasy Podcast. So for me, any kind of music with no voiceover, unless it's really short, is going to drive me nuts.
Well, Randy Cantrell, though, has made a living off of that. His podcast has music in it, and he plays the whole song.
Well, that's different. To me, that's a music show with some words of wisdom.
Okay.
But it's not his intro. But yeah, to me, that's a music. That's
I
random.
think it depends but I think it depends on what your audience is used to. If you start that way and you draw an audience, they come because they like it. If you have a short intro and then all of a sudden you add a 7-minute musical interlude, you're probably going to lose some folks over that because they're going to be like, I don't like the change. But if you start that way and you attract an audience who likes that kind of intro, who's to say it's wrong? I mean, you don't like it. You don't like it.
Yeah.
It could be, from a consulting standpoint, it could be a limiting factor to get, the question is, do the majority of people like that kind of intro or not? Yeah. And if they don't, you're artificially limiting, or not even artificially, you're limiting your audience to what could be. And our recommendation would be get a shorter intro, get to the show. I think that's the general wisdom.
I love Chris Coran, but he plays an entire song at the end of his show. And I don't care if that was like Stairway to Heaven. I don't want to listen to a song over and over.
A lot of podcasts, it's the same song every time.
Song.
Yeah, a lot of podcasters do that. Don't you just go 30, 30, 30 and it's done?
I do, but it's the fact that I'm in the car and I have, because it's Chris's show, I have to go next to get past it. And I don't have to do that to anybody else's show.
But you're still listening.
I'm still listening. Yeah, that's true. Teresa has a question about using the ATR 2100 through your Mac and using Skype. I can't figure out my levels and I'm super loud or very low. On a Mac, you have to go into preferences and then sound, and you'll see there's an input tab, kind of a sub tab, and I forget what the output. I think it's just called output. Yeah, one is the input level is your mic level, and then the output is the level of your guest. So if you use Ecamm Call Recorder, that for me on a Mac is like the best advice for recording a Skype call. But it is kind of weird because I've heard, I don't record a lot of Skype I don't do a lot on my Mac, period. Just because I'm familiar with PCs, not that it's wrong, but I've heard that there are times when Ecamm you'll have your guest was just booming and you couldn't tell when you heard it. So I wish all recorders had a better VU meter. It just must be something that's almost impossible to pull off. So
right. She also asks, does she have to have a mixer? And with the 2100, the answer is always no. But I think the experience is infinitely better with a mixer. As an example, if you have 2100 straight USB and you're trying to listen to your own audio back, it's super low. I can't, you can't make it sound loud enough to the way I like it without any help, without running that through a headphone amplifier or something like that. These are also very gain hungry mics. And so if you're going to run it through a mixer, it's going to take a lot of gain, and that's going to add some things to it, right? You can put a cloud lifter or something in between it to kind of help with that. But I think the experience is a whole lot better. I don't use the 2100s natively via USB. I'm almost always using them in XLR. Now, that doesn't mean it has to cost a lot. Like, when I do my remote podcasting at these conferences, I take a little $99. It's less than that, but a little Alesis Multimix 4, and that's got 2 XLRs, and it works really great for that. Doesn't have any preamps. It just works. It's pretty good. You still have to crank the gain to 3/4 to get it done, but it's the way to do it. So I'm a big fan. Well, Teresa said, what mixer would you recommend? I'm a big fan of that Alesis Multimix 4. That's what I use when we go. It's less than $100. It's a pretty good little mixer. I wrap it in bubble wrap and put it in the box, and I've set it up 4 or 5 times in the last 5 years at these remote. You could use it in your studio. It would work pretty well. There's other ways to do it, but I think a 2100 on a mixer is a much better experience. And I would also, if you like to hear your voice back, I'd run that through a headphone amplifier. So I'd come out of the main mix out, run it into those little boxes. You plug one in and then it's 4 out, whatever. That's what I like, because you get some additional volume control on it. So yeah, I just took a $70 mic and made it $400, but it's not really that much. But I think the experience is better. Dave?
See, I'm the direct opposite. I when I do the podcasters roundtable, I go directly out of this into that. The only thing I will say that, and part of this is because I'm deaf, I do have to jack up the volume almost all the way, and that usually will then have Ray going, "I'm hearing an echo," so I'll then have to turn it down a little bit. So you don't need a mixer, but it's handy because you can help shape the sound. You can add a little bass and treble. Things of that nature. So if you're just starting out, you could try it with just the mic. But depending on, like Jim said, depending on how you like to listen to it and things like that.
I just think for me, the experience is so much better having a small mixer in between. And I don't do a lot of tweaking on it, get the gain set right. That advice, when you go with a mixer, you set everything, you set all your EQ volumes to the middle, and then you turn everything else off. And then you bring your gain up, or bring volume up to infinity, right to that 0. So you're at where it's wide open. Then begin to turn your gain up until it gets to the right level. Then test, right? It's not that hard, to be honest. I think even a newbie can get this. It's not that, about 15 or 20 minutes with the instructions, a little bit of work, and maybe some YouTube videos, and you're off and running. I just like that. I like the mixer experience better.
Yeah. And Teresa says she was at MapCon. So that's where I was last weekend.
Yeah, how was the conference last weekend? We kind of buried the lead, so to speak.
Yeah, it was what I like about it, and I like the fact that Joe's not worried about it. It was maybe, I think he said he had 100 people ish sign up, and we had maybe 70 people show up.
Mm-hmm.
And
Where did they do it? What kind of facility?
It's in a Holiday Inn, so they have this kind of big ballroom, and it's a 1-track show. So you show up and everybody sees the same thing, and then at night we just go into the bar, and there's a little like lounge thing in the front, and we all just hang out together. So I kind of like it because everybody's in the same spot. A couple people might go out for dinner, things like that, but for the most part, we all just kind of hung out, and it was good. It was the first night was interesting because Joe was going to have, originally the first night was just going to be a mixer, like everybody to show up and network. And then he had a whole bunch of people request to speak. So he gave everybody, well, not everybody, but anybody that asked, an 8-minute section to do a talk. And the thing that it wasn't bad this year, but it was starting to get obvious, is Joe is a 2-man group. It's Joe and Amy J, I think was her name, is kind of helping. But next year he's going to have people, he's going to assemble a crew, for lack of a better phrase, because he's emceeing it while he's trying to get slides from people and things of that nature. And it's just, he's always right on the edge of just completely having it blow up in his face, which he didn't. But it was cool. He does, the one thing that I like about this is Joe does something that no other group does. I personally don't get a lot from it. I think it's a little weird, but it's Joe's thing, and he does it. And what it does is it forces people to get out of their comfort zone. So what they did this year was he generated like 6 words, and you had to make a podcast that used those 6 words. So like I actually participated this year. Last year I was a judge, but I'm like, maybe on the other side. And our words were estate, jar, something like concoction. Can't remember them, but they were so you end up creating a very weird story. No, there's no way around it. And so I had it to where Bernie was a drug addict, and he tipped over the jar and was eating greenie cat treats like they were, Oxycontin and blah,
Recovering
blah, blah.
Cats podcast.
Yeah. And so my favorite line was so we had somebody come on. It was the grief cast is what we came up. How do you deal with this? Because that way we could use estate, we could use all these other words. And then they said, well, so we brought somebody on who was a funeral planner. And so she said, well, does Bernie go to a church? Sometimes a church will help with your funeral planning. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, he's a Catholic. And the whole room just went, oh, so it's like, oh, come on. So it's interesting because it really does. You have to think way outside the box. There's no way, to do it. And so that's an interesting exercise. It was interesting to go through it. It takes about the better part of an hour and a half by the time everybody goes through the exercise. But the winning team got a free ATR 2100.
Oh, nice.
So that was kind of cool. But so for me, I'm like, I always kind of go, oh, it's time for that thing again. But the people that are there, I've talked to people who have gone through this and like, oh, you know what? If I can do that, because you act out the podcast in front of people. So it's a huge, like, get out of your comfort zone kind of thing. So that is Joe's thing. And Joe's like, he's sticking his flag in the dirt and like, this is what we do here.
It's good. What do you think you took away from it? What's the one thing
I took away? There's a guy, it was frustrating in a way. In fact, I'm trying to find him on the internet. I'm stalking him. His name is Rav. It's served SRVD. So there's no E. .vet. This guy has everything. He has a microphone. He has a recorder. He has a tagline from leaving to living. And it's all about, here's a guy, he has a great story. He was in the Air Force for 20 years. He looks like he's like 21. I'm like, when were you in the Air Force for 20 years? And he got out of the Air Force, got a 6-figure job. Things are great. He's married, living the dream. 9 months out, just comes home, and he's like beyond depressed and decides, I'm not going back to work. And so he went from you need to talk to somebody to you need a therapist to a psychologist to a psychologist or whatever.
Psychotherapist? No.
There's different levels, and eventually he made it up to psychiatrist. which of course they then just threw drugs at him like they were, M&Ms. And he said, I had a whole counter full. He said, then I talked to somebody else and found out what I was going through was normal. Like, this is a normal thing that people, when you leave the service. And he was like, wow, nobody told me that. And so his whole podcast now is he wants it not to be Air Force, Marines. He wants it to be I served, and this is how you can kind of go through this transition. And I'm like, oh, dude, this is a great podcast. I want to listen to this and his story. And I sat the first night, I talked to him to close till 2 a.m, just going through his, well, I don't know. I don't want to look stupid. All right. Well, you're not going to look stupid because it's not live. So the only way you look stupid is if you record something and put it out live. And I was just, well, I'm not sure this, I'm not really sure I like the sound of my voice. Okay, let's explain why, so everything was just, I was just like, come on, jump in the water. So It was killing me. So that was cool. The one thing I thought was interesting was I heard this one line, and I can't remember the woman's name. She was from San Diego, and she said, she called it halt, when you should not do anything when you're in, you should halt from doing whatever you're doing if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And then Jim and I were talking pre-show, and we were like, we're always hungry, angry, lonely. We're usually tired and hungry.
Two of those. I'm almost always. I'm tired and hungry all the time.
Yeah. So, but that was interesting. In fact, I saw, I don't think Kim is here today, but Kim from Toastmasters101.net said that she would record a show after kind of being frustrated from life. And she said she should do that because it does come across.
I think you could check your attitude a little bit. Like, if, it's not great to get on the microphone angry. I mean, that doesn't go well for you. You think you're venting and it's going to be fine, but it usually doesn't go very well. And I think the mode at which the attitude at which we come to when we're going to get on the microphone, I think we really got to check that. If we're having a bad day and it's been awful, maybe postpone that recording.
Yeah.
Just don't jump into it. It could get ugly. You think it's therapy for you, but it's not for others. And so it's, you check it, kind of check it at the door. Speaking of check-in, Dave, do we have some awesome supporters that we should probably?
We do have some awesome, that's funny that you say that, Jim, because I'm not prepared for that at all.
Well, I'll give you a second.
I did get to meet some cool people. I got to meet Clay from Fish Nerds. He'd been on the podcast review show. And then, Harry Duran actually came in all the way from California. So he was there.
Yeah,
Amanda Beard there. Yeah, Amanda Beard was there from the Great Beer Adventure. And she was one that was just saying, it's hard when you're a mom and you're expected to, be a mom. And then you're trying to do a podcast where you have to travel around and talk to breweries. And she was just kind of getting a little overwhelmed. And and she was kind of like, I feel like I'm a bad podcaster. I'm like, no, you're not a bad podcaster. You're a really good mom because you're putting your kids first. I'm like, do not put your kids last so you can go talk about beer to somebody because it's your hobby. I said, realize moms need hobbies too. But I think one of my favorite lines I ever heard, my cousin called my mom once crying, and she was explaining what was going on, and she goes, and I just hate my kids. And my mom goes, oh, honey, that's normal. Yeah, you're going to hate your kids. It's just like, because they were little at the time. They were like, 7 and 4 or something like that, and 2. I think she had 3 going. And she was like, yeah, that's just, you're going to hate your kids. This doesn't make you a bad mom. It makes you human.
Makes you normal.
Yeah. So he said, pulling up, okay, so it's not the first of the month. So we're going to think, I don't have my, wait, let me see if I can do this. There's a new thing in Patreon that in theory,
love the changes, by the way. When we think about Patreon, if you've used Patreon, but you haven't been out there in a while to check their kind of their new design, they have done a nice job of consolidating and kind of giving a much better look. It actually looks a lot better on mobile as well. It's a lot more easier to use. So if you haven't been out to Patreon in a couple months to check and by the way, as Dave's getting this set up, one of the things give 1 sec.
Okay.
One of the things I've noticed is I don't really pay a lot of attention to Patreon. I got some subscribers. I thank them every show. I have a special audio and video feed for them, those kinds of things. But I hadn't really checked the payouts. Man, $50 over 6 months adds up to a little bit of cash.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. That's an account I don't really check that often. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could probably make an upgrade to something there, And so don't underestimate the value of your subscribers over time. It can be very, very valuable to you, both in relationships and in dollars. So who should we thank?
Well, they have a thing called the relationship manager, because what kills me is I can't put in notes about people because I want to put in their website. And so there's a thing inside of Patreon called the relationship manager, which allows me to add additional details. Now, what kills me is, from what I've seen, I can't export this. So, but one would be Glenn Hebert, who's feeling very bad because he missed 2 episodes of the Horse Radio Network at horseradionetwork.com. And I'm like, Glenn, you know, your house is fine. Your horses are fine. You lived through a hurricane. I think people are going to give you, I think, you know, hurricane is an acceptable excuse for that. Josh Rivers from creativestudio.academy, and Max Trescott does aviationnewstalk.com. So I'm able to put those notes in now, but it's still not a way for me to print this out so I could have it in front of me. So to give you the behind the scenes stuff is I'm actually clicking on their name to see the notes I have about them. So it's better, you know, and they're definitely changing some things over there, which is cool, but not quite. Like if I click on what I thought about doing, and I'm not sure I can do this, if I go to the regular kind of Patreon look, they have a spot there for shipping. And I thought, I wonder if I could go in and edit their shipping, because I'm not shipping anybody anything. So there's nothing in that. And I thought, I wonder if I could tell people, hey, update your shipping and put your website. That way I could export it and have that information. But so yeah, if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, simply go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And here's a question, Jim. I actually almost put this in the Patreon group just because it's not podcasting related, but I put it in my other Patreon account for my weight loss show. I made a video on how to make an Excel spreadsheet to track your weight. So if you have a goal and you're like for me, I want to weigh 190 by my birthday. That's my goal. And I put in what I weigh, and then I figured it out, you know, on this day I should be weighing, so I can tell if I'm ahead or behind schedule. And it's really easy to do. It takes about 4 or 5 minutes. And I just go through and explain, here, type this in here and blah, blah, blah. And I even give you a template. So if you want to take it and fix it from there. And I was like, it's not really podcasting related, but I thought, you know, I guess I could throw it out there. I don't know that anybody's going to unsubscribe from their Patreon because they got a weight loss spreadsheet. But I was like, you know, people might like this. I don't know. So
yeah, no, it's nice to share those. And again, it depends on your audience, but it's kind of nice to share those things from time to time. Get a little bit of feedback, do something a little bit different. You never know. Yeah. You know, as people have gotten to know you through your podcast, you know, they know you've got another one where you're talking about that. And I think it's kind of helpful as long as you're not spamming them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to go, hey, thanks for being a patron. If you send me $20, I'll give you a weight loss spreadsheet. Yeah. So
get on our mailing list, and exactly. I'll send you a free weight loss. Yeah. Those kinds of things. Dave, let me just say this really quick. So the next 7 weeks I'm going to be out. And yes. When we think about podcasting, for the last 3 years we've been doing this, I have tried to podcast and run my high school internship program at the same time. And so I would show up at 9, get them started. I would run to the studio. We've had all kinds of interesting fun, like fire alarms and things not working.
Did you have something with a guy with a bucket or something that was always messing you up?
Guy with a bucket.
I remember there's something. It's like every time you started, like they would start.
Oh yeah. The cleaning crew would come out of the elevator with those garbage cans on wheels, and I swear, you know, we have tile right outside the studio there, and I swear he was just rolling, and he was just sitting there going, you know, not going anywhere, just trying to make noise. But as a podcaster, sometimes it's a difficult decision to say, do I podcast or do I work? And could I do both? I absolutely could. But I was doing this evaluation of the time I was spending on this group, and we have 50 high schoolers coming this year. That it's a new record for us, right? And
dude, that's a handful.
Yeah, it's a big handful, a couple of them. And I started to do some evaluation of like, hey, what am I trying to do here? And what are my obligations? And yes, I could do both, but I'm getting to the point where I was doing neither of them very, very well. And I get these kids for 6 or 7 weeks. And there'll be a weekend there's ACT weekend. And so I'll be here for that. But there's a time in there that you have with them that you just can't miss. And I had to make that decision. It was a hard one to say, Dave, I'm going to be gone for an extended period of time. It's going to be 6 weeks. Not the end of the world, right? You'll fill in. It'll be great.
It is to me. No, Jim. No, it'll be fun.
But it's it is one of those things as podcasters. Sometimes we have to make that decision of, do I podcast or do I not? And this has been a real world example of having to make that hard choice. Listen, I love coming here on Saturday mornings. I've done this for 3 years with you every Saturday morning because it's what I love to do. We just have a good time together. But I had to make that decision. And so sometimes as podcasters, we have to think, okay, I can't podcast all the time. I actually need to, in this case, it just falls at an inconvenient time when I happen to be doing this program with my kids. So anyways, I thought I'd throw that out there because I know some podcasters have struggled a little bit, and I'd love to be able to do both, but I just can't. In this case, I'm choosing work. So I'll miss you guys for the 6 weeks I'm gone. It's not forever. I'll be back as we get closer to the Thanksgiving time frame and one in between. But David, I appreciate your grace in letting me, some podcasters would be like, well, I guess it's time to find a new co-host if you're gonna, some would though. And I appreciate your grace in that, just to say, yeah, we'll keep the seat warm. Well, it's a good opportunity to try out some new folks.
Right.
I appreciate your willingness to let me do that.
Yeah, it'll be fun to that's half the here's what it actually does. And not that people that fill in are, what's what I'm looking for here. It's fun to try on new pairs of pants, but everybody has their favorite pair of jeans. And so because we have been doing this 3 years, it's kind of like, all right, well, it was fun hanging out with insert person, but you know what? Jim's coming back next week and it'll be fun to get the band back together. And then, I have I got some kind of bad news. It's kind of weird. And did you ever think about like who your, like, in my opinion, my best friend is a guy I've known since 6th grade. How old are you when you're in 6th grade? Was that 11?
12, 11, 12.
So I've known this guy 40 years. Now, over that time, he's moved to North Carolina because he was in the Marines. Then he moved home, and then I moved to Cleveland, and then I moved back. And we don't really see each. It's one of those things where I'm like, we didn't take advantage of the fact that we both lived in the same city. I think we've seen each other like 3 or 4 times since I moved back in 2 years, and he's moving here again. He's moving to Oklahoma. Why? Because that's where his son is. And now he's got 3 grandkids, and he's kind of like, you know what? They could use a little help over there. He's got a good skill set to where he and his wife, and they're going to move. And the thing that doesn't bug me about this is the fact that the older you get, it's harder to find people who like really know you. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's that same thing. So when we get together, even though we don't see each other that much, we pick up right where I got to quit snapping my fingers. Did I ruin anything?
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Okay, good. A magic snap. You just kind of pick up where you left off. So it's funny. Yeah. We'll get in, we'll start cranking old Van Halen, and you pick up right where you left off. So that's kind of the cool thing about having a co-host that you have, chemistry with, and you kind of know. It was like today. I wasn't ready for Patreon, and you just picked up and like, all right, cool. That was awesome. So,
but I have my own Mike Weger, who co-hosts with me over at Home Gadget Geeks. Mm-hmm. He picked up a job that really knocked him out, and I lose him for 12 or 13 weeks at a time. And it's okay. Like he's always said before, hey, if you want to go do something else, and I've had different guest hosts on, but no, he's my guy. He's the co-host, and I'm gonna leave the seat open until he tells me he doesn't want to do it anymore. And right. And effectively, he's not on the show very much. I maybe get him 4 times a year now at this point. And to be honest, a lot of the interviews I do, they're smoother because it's just me and someone else, and I don't have a third person in there. So that works out pretty well. And I adjust the show content for just me instead of having him. I do it differently if he was going to be there on a more regular basis. But, you make that, and everybody's situation is different. But it's it's awesome to have a show like this, to have a friendship like this, where I can just say, hey, I'm going to be out for 6 or 7 weeks. Okay, cool. Got this, and it's going to be fine. And that's a great, in a podcasting relationship, that's a great place to be. And so if you've got your co-hosts relationship like that, at Gallup, we have this question in our Q12 assessment: do I have a best friend at work? And we think friendship is important into partnerships. If the better the friendship is, the more productive it is. And so anyways, I just continue to strive for that in your working relationships with your co-hosts. If you have them, that relationship you have with them matters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Here is an interesting question. It had 2 words, and it simply said, this is from Erica Collins. She said, need sponsors. This is in a Facebook group. And so I kind of emailed her and I said, well, okay, first things first, have you verified, have you gotten a focus group to ensure that what you're doing is delivering content? I had a client call this week, and they're doing a show for truck drivers. And I said, okay, how did you know your content was good? And it was so weird that I asked them that, because they're like, what? And I go, how do you know your content's good? And they're like, well, because we're a trucking company and blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of like almost like a Gary Leland, where they're going to be they're doing a show about trucking, but they're more or less their own sponsor. I'm like, okay, well, did you get any feedback from actual truckers? You know, and they had, which was good. But it was just kind of weird that when people go in like, okay, I need sponsors. I'm like, okay, well, first things first, you know, where's your audience? You monetize an audience. And I think sometimes we kind of overthink this. There's a great video. Let me throw this. It's a really old picture, a really old video of Gary Vee. And he just goes in, and I think he goes on the internet. He was doing it. He said, what if you do a beer show? And he like typed in something, found somebody who might be a good sponsor, and he just called them and said, hey, I do a show. Want to know if you'd be interested in sponsoring it. And the guy was kind of like, not right now. And he's like, okay, but you know, and it just, I think we overthink that. I also think we're waiting for sponsors to come to us, and that doesn't happen a lot. It will if you get enough name in your area, but and then of course also you know, you don't have to have a sponsor. We should say that, but in this case, she wants one. And you know, there are all sorts of things. There's affiliate marketing. There's, you know, I don't know. What are your thoughts on if somebody comes up to you and says need sponsors?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a sales job. You know, if you're not good at selling, you're going to struggle to get sponsors. You've got to get out there and sell yourself and sell what you have. And I have a long-term relationship with LastPass on my tech show. And, you know, there's been a couple times it's gotten a little thin, and, you know, the ice has gotten a little thin. I'm kind of like, and, you know, I just contacted him again. I'm like, no, we're in. We haven't said anything, but it's been busy. We're in. So, you know, send us his documentation or whatever. And I like those. I'm developing a new one with this product line called Jellycomb. And they make these little gadgets. They're all $50 or less, and they're all tech-based, you know, little portable keyboards and, you know, dongles and those kinds of things. And I just, I'm doing a meetup 2 weeks from now in Indianapolis. And I just contacted the rep and said, hey, I'm going to a meetup. If you want to send me some giveaway gear, I'll give it away. And they could have said no. Within 15 minutes, she's like, boxes in the mail, you know? And I was like, all right,
Nice.
Cool. So, but you have to ask. And I think to your point, you can't ask, you can ask too much. You can ruin the relationship, but you've got to get to that point where you're saying, okay, this is what I need. And are you on or are you off? And to be honest with you, people who do this kind of work, that's what they want. They want straightforward, tell them exactly what it's going to take. Don't beat around the bush because they're at work and they don't have enough time to screw with your passive aggressive, trying to figure out things with you. Just tell them what you need and they'll say yes or no. And, you know, if they say no, it was probably too much. So then you lower your price. It's just a business proposition. So like you said, don't overthink it.
I like what Emily says in the chat room. She says, I was curious why she, and then in quotation marks, needed sponsors. This is one of those where it's like, if you got into podcasting to make money fast, it's like, it can be done. But again, you monetize an audience, and sometimes it takes a while to.
It doesn't make a better podcast, to be honest with you. In fact, in some cases, you lose listeners because they're like, oh, I thought this was kind of going to be an indie thing and I didn't have to listen to advertising, and I hate advertising. So by putting sponsors in your program, you might actually be losing listeners. I have to think about that. Do you want to lose a few listeners? Put some ads, put some really bad ads in there. Man, you'll lose some folks.
Yeah. And that's why I told her, I said, you know, you can always go for affiliate marketing if that's what you need and things like that. But it's a lot of work when you have a sponsor. When I had Emerald City Productions, you know, there's paperwork involved and, you know, letting people know I put the ad in and things of that nature.
Just reminded me, I've got paperwork sitting right here that I need to turn in. This was the last bit I need to turn in to get money. And so it's, you know, it's like, oh, you got to do those things.
Yeah. So holy cow. It's almost time for post show because, you know, there's the music. Hopefully you hear the music.
I don't, but that's okay.
No? Nothing?
There it is.
Okay.
There it is. Yeah.
Not quite up far enough. which I always know it makes the Hangout sound awesome when you mix music in the background of the Hangout. It's trying to compress anything. Jim, what's coming up on the AverageGuy.tv?
Yeah, I mentioned LastPass in October, November. That's actually kind of like October, November, like backup security month. So be thinking about some of the things that you're doing around that. Windows 10 has a big release as well, and I got a guest coming on, Rich Hay, to talk about that. So if you're interested in what's coming in the fall creators update, that's what's going on at the AverageGuy.tv at Home Gadget Geeks.
This week on the School of Podcasting, I will be reviewing, finally, I keep teasing this, there's this yellow mic thing that Sean from Be Your Own Nerd had at Podcast Movement. It's just expensive. It's like $700 for a microphone, but it's also a recorder and a couple other things. So we'll be listening to that. And then I think I'm going to do a thing, I did one once, 3 things every podcast needs that don't require bandwidth, microphones, and hosting. And it was, you have to have support, you have to have your health, and you have to have your attitude. Those are those things. I have something very similar to that. Things that people juggle in podcasting to keep things going. And it's not really about the content. It kind of is, but I'm shaping that idea as we speak, if you can't tell. So that'll be on this Saturday show. This Monday show. So that'll be coming up. And stay tuned for the post show. And thanks for listening. We're here every Saturday at askthepodcastcoach.com/live.